Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, if you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Please also consider going to our website and donating $20.24 for our 2024 fundraising campaign. Visit the Film Florida merchandise page at filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. All merchandise proceeds go to the Film Florida Filmmaker Grant and Scholarship Fund. Jennie Jarvis is an award-winning director, writer, and actress, as well as the writer of the award-winning textbook Crafting the Character Arc, a practical guide to character creation and development. Jennie is also a judge for multiple major screenwriting and film competitions each year and served as the artistic director for the Orpheus Theater Group from 2006 to 2008. As an educator, Jennie has mentored more than 400 student film projects, including several that went on to win or be nominated for major awards, including Telly Awards, Suncoast Region Student Production Awards, Student Emmy Awards, and ASC Awards. We talk all of these topics and more on this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Here's my conversation with Jennie Jarvis. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Jennie.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
So let's kind of start at the beginning. What's your backstory?
Sure. So I'm pretty much a Florida girl. I was raised in Orange Park, Florida, which is a suburb of Jacksonville. And then I was accepted to Douglas Anderson School of the Arts, which is in Jacksonville, #1 school of the arts in the world, I like to say. Sorry, Dr. Phillips. But I was accepted into actually their very first creative writing program. It was the first year that they had that. And they unfortunately had hired an instructor that was not great at working with high schoolers. And so like half of us changed over to the theater program in 9th grade. And so I wound up being a theater major at Douglas Anderson. But while I was there, I started making a bunch of videos through my television production class. And those videos actually went on to help gather the very first grant that would eventually create cinematic arts major at Douglas Anderson. So
Okay.
they do have a film program now. I was kind of in that first group that helped with the fundraising for that. And then afterwards, I went to Florida State University's film school, which at the time was the, College of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences
Right.
and Recording Arts, and some insanely long title. Now it's just the film school. And then after that, I kind of headed out into the California world.
Well, let's go a little bit backwards. I mean, the next question is obviously
sure.
like, how did you get your start in the industry, or what drove you to interest? Clearly, you were there from the beginning, but talk before you went to school on why it was that you wanted to get into this industry.
It's theater's fault, really. My dad was an insurance fraud investigator and didn't do anything artistic, but for some random reason, he decided to participate in the Orange Park Community Theater's production of Mornings at 7. And I'd go to the theater with him for rehearsals, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. And I was really young at the time. And that summer, I asked my parents that I could sign up for like the kids' theater program. It was a children's theater production of The Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
And because I was one of the youngest ones there, I got cast as like Toto #2, right? Because of course all the young kids are all just walking around on their hands and knees. And I remember there was one point where I was supposed to be barking, and I remember telling the Cowardly Lion, I don't have motivation to bark at you. Can you step forward at me so I have a reason to bark at you? And I think that did it for me. Just the idea of being in this public venue, doing theater, and specifically kind of the directing aspects. It's very powerful when you say, hey, I need this thing, and then you get it when you're like 5, 6 years old. And then I just fell in love with the theater. And while I was living in Orange Park, I did a lot of Orange Park community theater stuff. But I'll be honest, I was this weird little neurodiverse kid long before neurodiversity was really understood or treated with the respect that it is now. So basically, I was just this strange outcast. And it's like the closest they could do for me was, they had the once a week pull out for gifted kids. But even in the gifted room, I was the weirdo.
Mm.
And theater was a place where I felt comfortable, where I felt like I could escape into this other world, and I felt like I belonged for the first time ever. And it helped that like I made friends who were both either much older than me or who were the same age as me, who were also these weird little outcasts. We were all together on the island of misfit toys, right? And I just love that. I just love that. But being the weird outcast, being the one who is constantly bullied and made fun of, I wanted a grander scheme. You know, I had that weird, deep, innate kind of desire. I want to do something big so those people who made fun of me in high school would know, you know, what, you know, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I was drawn towards film over theater because honestly, I thought I'd have a bigger audience to prove myself in. But even to this day, you know, my heart is very divided between film and theater. And I still, you know, I still can tell you like what play did David Tennant just wrap in London 2 weeks ago is Macbeth, by
Hmm.
the way. I can still say those kinds of things. I have friends that are on Broadway right now, but I also, you know, I have friends who are in, you know, a show on Peacock or who are in this movie. So my heart is very divided between
Hmm.
film and theater. But honestly, I wanted a bigger audience because I felt like I just had so much to prove, which I mean, I think so many of us that get into film, it's deep inside. We want to prove ourselves to somebody who said something at some point in time.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I mean, you're an award-winning director, writer, and actress. I mean, it
Mhm.
sounds like you dabbled in all of those things very early on.
Yeah, yeah. I started the acting really started at Orange Park Community Theater, you know, starting when I was 5. And then I remember I did a show at Orange Park Community Theater. It was Wait Until Dark. And there was like this character for like this young girl who lives upstairs who comes down and just throws temper tantrum and like throws everything in the space. And yeah, and I had this one little girl who came up to me all nervous wanting my autograph afterwards. And I was like, oh my
Uh,
God, this is totally for me, you know? But I love acting. But I also, while I was at Douglas Anderson, I really fell in love with directing. We had starting at in ninth grade, we were doing basically graduate level script analysis work.
mm,
And I fell in love with breaking down scripts and finding the structure and finding the motivations and looking at all the different goals and how they work together and really looking at, you know, the gestalt of it, right? Like how all the pieces come together to make something bigger than the individual pieces.
yeah.
And I've always been pretty good about having a really solid vision, but recognizing that everybody that participates in the process can make it better than I could make it on my own. I'm very big on what's your skill? Great. I'm going to use that. You know,
Mhm.
what's your skill? Great. I'm going to use that. And I think that's why so often when I direct something, people want to work with me again afterwards, especially actors. I love actors. And then getting into writing, I mean, I've always kind of been a writer. I've always gone off into my own world. You know, I make jokes with my students that if you know how to lie, you know how to write. And when I was a young troubled kid, I did lie a lot. You know, I believe I've gotten past the majority of that, except for the white lie when we're trying to tell James why he's not allowed. James is my son, why he's not allowed to do something. Sometimes we have to do a little white lie
Uh-huh.
because we can't say the real answer sometimes. He's set. He's 8. So you know, sometimes we have some white lies, but a lot of my big screenwriting started because I couldn't find the projects that I wanted to direct. I like
Mm,
things that are a little weird. I like things that are a little different. And everything that I was finding in terms of scripts of things that I wanted to direct were they were so mainstream, they were so normal. And I like things that are normal adjacent. Like there's
okay.
things that are to them that are familiar, but then there's just enough weird to go, this is different, which has been part of what's made my work stand out, but it's also what's been my biggest trouble. Like my agent was always saying, you know, your work is so good, but I don't know how to sell it.
Mm,
And that's always been a little bit of an issue because I don't quite fit in the box.
okay. Yeah. Now you mentioned you went to FSU. Tell us why you went there and tell us a little bit about your time while you were in Tallahassee.
So, yeah, so I went to Florida State University's film school. I was fortunate
Hmm.
enough to be one of the people admitted into the proper program. I applied to multiple film programs, honestly, and they were one of the ones that accepted me, that was close enough that my mom would let me go. My mom never really bought into the whole going into film thing.
Okay.
I think deep down inside, she really was just hoping I'd meet a man and get married and then give up on this whole career thing. She's very old fashioned. She still is to this day. And I think the only reason why she let me go to a film school was because it was still in Florida. But it's a wonderful program, and I had some absolutely phenomenal instructors. I still to this day talk about Richard Portman. He was an Oscar-winning sound designer, and the year that Moonlight, which was mostly made by FSU
Mm-hmm.
alumni, was nominated for Best Picture, Richard was in the in memoriam, because he had just passed away that year. And man, like all of us were just bawling because we
Yeah.
loved that. But within the school itself, it was a bit of a wake-up call for me. I think that was the first time that I really had to transition into more technical things. And I'm a very creative person, and I struggled with some of the tech stuff. I also had a bit of a situation my senior year of high school where someone caused permanent damage to my wrists,
Okay.
um, deliberately. It was a whole thing. And so my freshman year of film school, all of the muscles in my arms weren't working properly. And I couldn't lift C-stands. Like it was
Uh,
that bad for a whole year. And so I started off in this very difficult situation where I did great in the writing class. I could analyze and criticize things. I had a sense of, like mise en scene and the more artistic kind of sides of filmmaking. But when it came to the technical stuff, my brain couldn't quite process it. And then the physical side of it, it couldn't quite process it. And so it was a very difficult situation for me because not only was it like my first year away from home, but I was forced to recognize some of my own weaknesses, right?
okay.
I had been in this program at Douglas Anderson where even though socially I never got along with anybody, I never get along with anybody socially. I'm just this weird person that people just don't know how to deal with me a lot of times. I don't know how to deal with me. I don't know how to deal with people. Like people confuse me. But I was in this situation in film school where I was attempting to learn one, how to live on my own because I had just left home, two, to go into this new aspect of film that was so much more technical and physical than I had ever experienced, and then dealing with the social side. So it was a bit of a wake-up call for me. I wish I could say that my time at FSU was all sunshine and daisies,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't feel that. And it's not because it wasn't a good program. It very much was, but I had a really difficult time transitioning there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I hear it. I hear you. And that makes a lot of sense. Now, you also have a couple other degrees. You have an MA from the University of North Florida and your MFA from Queen's University in Charlotte. Talk about those degrees and how they helped advance where you wanted to go.
So, when I first went back for a master's degree, it was after I had left California because I had gone out. I lived in California for 8 years. And then when I came back to Florida, I kind of had to hit the reset button. I had some personal tragedies, as they were, and I needed to hit the reset button, and I wasn't really sure what to do.
Mm.
But one of the stipulations that I was given about me being allowed to come back home was that I couldn't do film.
Ah,
And so I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go get a degree and maybe I can teach. I went into the English department because it was the only thing. I was like, well, maybe I could teach literature or something, right? Well, as I was going through the MA program there, I kind of carved my own little film studies and dramatic literature minor. And then within a year or two of being there, the director of the department realized I had all this experience working in Hollywood. And so I actually got to adjunct while I was taking my master's degree. So I wasn't exactly a GTA, but I was an adjunct instructor. So I was teaching screenwriting at University of North Florida at the same time that I was getting my degree. And that's, I think, when I really fell in love with teaching because I was like, okay, I was kind of doing this on the DL where I could be like film adjacent, but still be allowed to be back at my parents' house. But I was just kind of stuck on my own path because I am a stubborn one. But I really fell in love with the teaching at that point. I had taught different workshops when I was in both San Francisco and in Los Angeles. So I really liked it. It reminded me a lot of theater in terms of like being in an audience and preparing,
Hmm.
presenting prepared information. There's a lot of similarity there. But being in the formal classroom and especially teaching screenwriting where I could help people get their vision onto the page, that was awesome. And I fell in love with it. And I talked to the director of the department there about, could I become a full-time faculty member? And they said, well, you don't have a terminal degree. And that's why I did the degree through the Queen's University of Charlotte, which was a low residency program. Absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal program. You only have to be on campus 2 weeks the whole year.
Mm.
And so you get the best of the best as the people working with you. So like my thesis advisor was also the head of creative writing at USC, right?
Wow.
So absolutely amazing program. And I mean, honestly, I did it at first because I wanted the piece of paper that would let me teach, but
Yep.
I feel like it invigorated me in a completely new way. And then I was able to teach at a couple other universities because the director had decided at UNF at that time, I don't think it's the case anymore, but that they wouldn't hire someone with an MFA for a full-time position. They wanted a PhD.
Okay.
And so I had to look at other universities. And then a friend of mine from film school kind of let me know about the fact that Full Sail University was hiring down here in Orlando. And I got that job and I've been at Full Sail ever since.
With such a focus on story and writing in your background, how does that influence you as a filmmaker and as an educator?
I mean, story is everything. Story is life. And if you think about the arcs within a story, they're the same as the arcs within life. They're what we expect from everything, right? There's a YouTuber that I follow named Rachel Stevens who loves to teach about the plot embryo or the story circle, which was kind of Dan Harmon's version of the hero's journey. And she talks about how, the journey through the circle of you leave your place of rest, you go and you cross the threshold into a new land, you go into the depths in order to find what you want, you come back a changed person, having suffered a price for achieving what you wanted, all of that stuff. It's a big circle, and that's life. You look at the seasons, you look at even the academic years are just like
Hmm.
they're all this circular kind of pattern. There's all of these arcs. And we here in the West, like everything we know is based in story, right?
Hmm.
If you think about the beginning, middle, and end structure that comes from like Aristotle and the Poetics and all of that, why does that structure work? Well, it's because we're introduced to something, we get to see the complication, and then we have a resolution that leads to some kind of cathartic release, right? Well, in life, we have that same thing, right? You think about the worst relationship you've ever had, right? You meet the person, you fall in love, it's all hot and fire and everything is amazing. And you go through the triumphs and the ups and the downs and the breakups and the fights and all that. And then you want that closure. You want to feel like you've come to an ending. And if you have a bad breakup and you never fully have closure for that relationship, it will haunt you for the end of time, right?
True. Very true.
However, if you have a perfectly healthy relationship that just kind of hits its expiration date, and one day you just look at each other and go, I don't know that we want to be together anymore. Yeah, I don't think so either. And then you just kind of go your own way. 3 years later, you forget what that person's name was
Yep.
because you've received the closure, you've moved on with your life, right? Everybody remembers that person in high school who suddenly just stopped talking to you, or that person who said that thing and you never knew why. But when things happen naturally and you have the full closure, you feel like you can move on. And I think life is storytelling and storytelling is life. And I very much sound like a hippie right now, but I very much believe that it's true at the same time. And one of the best things that I've kind of learned as an educator that I never learned in life was a lot of people's motivations, because having students month after month after month after month, I've been able to see what drives all of these individuals, right? It's like I teach screenwriting and everyone thinks, oh, it's a writing class. There's going to be talking about grammar and formatting and spelling. And that's not really storytelling, right?
Right.
That's the polish. But if you think about your first draft is often called like a vomit draft, or Anne Lamott calls it the shitty first draft, right? It's supposed to be a messy, scrappy, ugly thing, which is most of life, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes a lot of my students tend to not even feel comfortable getting the mess on the page. They think what they put on the page has to be this perfect, amazing, phenomenal thing. And
Right.
it's not. And half of my job as an educator is not so much write the best script possible, as much as give yourself permission to write something that isn't perfect. And it's really funny because I've had like 6 or 7 classes in a row now that have all said my class feels like therapy. Because we talk about, give yourself permission to be where you are. Don't compare yourself to other people, right? It's like, yeah, your first draft may not be as good as this other person's first draft, but they've been, they have an undergraduate degree in film, whereas your undergraduate degree is in marketing. Like, don't compare that. And so, life and storytelling is all the same. And when you find the stories that work with people, at the end of the day, we all want the same things, right? We all want to be seen. We all want to be validated. We all want to feel love. We all want to feel like the struggles that we've been through had a purpose for existing. And I've learned so much more about how to operate as a human being by teaching. And then I'm able to turn around and put that stuff into my films as well. Like,
Hmm.
I know I'm a better filmmaker now as a result of working with students than I ever was beforehand.
Hmm. Well, speaking of that,
Sure. Okay. Go for it.
you wrote, directed, and starred in the award-winning short film Connection, and the
Correct.
film was screened at multiple film festivals, some which were here in Florida. What was the inspiration behind the film, and talk about the whole process?
Yeah, sure. So I first kind of came up with the idea for Connection during the pandemic. I was going insane, as were most of us, just wanting to do things. And at the time, my son was about 5 years old. And so it had been a good 5 years since I'd really allowed myself to do anything creative, because there is this vast area in the first few years of your child's life where nothing else can exist except keeping this tiny human alive and breathing.
Yep.
And usually that only lasts a couple years. Then you put him in daycare and it's a little bit better. Well, then his autism diagnosis came out.
Okay.
And then we had a tree fall through our house and we were struggling with homelessness for a while, right? So it had been multiple years where just nothing creative was happening for me. And then the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
And we're all inside our houses, and the child is alive and breathing, and the husband is working from home, and I'm here working from home. And I'm just like, I need to do something creative or I'm going to lose my mind.
Hmm.
Well, during this time period, I happened to see this television show called Staged. It came out of the UK. It's David Tennant and Michael Sheen, and the whole thing is shot through Zoom, everything. And I was like, well, I have Zoom.
Hmm.
Can I make a movie that takes place through Zoom? And so I really started with kind of this idea of this platform of what can I do to create an entire film that takes place through Zoom? And I thought about, well, what kind of scenarios would be there? And I'm usually drawn towards more fantasy and science fiction. And so I eventually was like, okay, well, what if there was a dating platform, a digital, like a video dating platform on a spaceship? And the spaceship happens to be one of the ships that is evacuating the planet Earth because we screwed up the environment and now we all have to leave Earth, right? And that's really kind of where it started from. So it started from looking at this comedy show with like David Tennant and Michael Sheen, right? Which has now come full circle if you saw the 2024 BAFTAs, where you kind of got the payoff of that whole relationship, right?
Hmm.
But you've got that. And then I kind of took it into this world that was this balance of lighthearted romantic comedy, and then ends with kind of this tragic sense of this person who's just absolutely desperate for connection and doesn't have the ability to do that. And so that's really where it kind of came from. We shot it during the pandemic. I basically was with a couple of people on the soundstage at Full Sail, where we literally just took a corner of the soundstage and I shot it through Zoom. My other leading actor was actually someone I met at Orange Park Community Theater many, many years ago.
Wow.
He and I had not been in the same room, the same physical room, for 16 years when we shot that.
Wow.
He was just outside Baltimore, Maryland when we shot it. I was here in Orlando. And then it took about a year and a half for post-production, because the whole thing looks like like a regular Zoom call, but it was actually edited. And then we have some visual effects. We have like spaceship at the beginning and a spaceship at the end. And so it took about a year and a half of post-production before we were finally able to kind of get it back out into the world. And it just seemed to resonate with people, which, I mean, kind of makes sense because we were all kind of going insane and desperate to connect in the middle of the pandemic.
Right. Talk to us a little bit about the film festival circuit that the film went on.
Absolutely. We actually premiered the film at the Fort Lauderdale International Film Festival, where we tied for Best Florida Short Film. And it was a wonderful kind of closure kind of moment for me, because the Fort Lauderdale International Film Festival was actually the very first film festival that I had ever attended, was Fort
Wow.
Lauderdale International Film Festival. So we had gone as like a field trip while I was at the film school at Florida State University. And so it was really nice that, kind of my return to, filming in Florida after a while got to premiere there at Fort Lauderdale. Then we kind of entered film festivals all over the world. It's shown in London, it's shown in Germany, it's shown in Australia. London Sci-Fi, I think, was taking it on tour, is what they had emailed me about. So it's going to a few other places there. It's shown in California. It's shown in just a whole bunch of places. I have to look, but it's over 24 film festivals is
Wow.
where it's actually screened. And then we won or were nominated for just a slew of awards as well, with the biggest ones being the two gold Telly Awards. So we won one in the writing category and one in the best low budget. Basically, it's like it had to be like under $700 per minute, and the whole film was $300.
Yeah.
But the film festival circuit itself was, it's like we spent less than $300 to actually make the film, but for the film festival circuit itself was like $3,000, because,
Right. Uh,
film festivals can get expensive.
yes.
But yeah, so we had about a 2.5 year festival run for that one.
That's cool. Now, if I have my facts right, you've been at Full Sail since 2011.
Correct.
Talk about the evolution of the students, and you talked a little bit about your evolution as a filmmaker because of the students, but how have the students changed in your time there?
So I first started in the creative writing MFA program, and then I moved into the film production MFA program. I was actually the second instructor hired within that program.
Wow.
So I have been there from the beginning. I think at the beginning, a lot of the first students that we received were a lot of people who had gone through the undergraduate program and were just looking for their next step. So these were already people that were used to the Full Sail system, which is so much faster and more chaotic than
Right.
your traditional university. And so we had a lot of people that were very technically savvy, because our undergraduate program is very technically savvy. And we didn't see as much diversity as we're seeing now. Over the years, our film production program has really become an international program.
Mm,
Um, if students, like international students, want to come to this country and study, they have to be able to financially prove that they can be in the US at the school for the amount of time of the program. Well, with our program being only a 1 year MFA program, where most film schools are 2 year MFA programs, we're definitely much more attractive for those students, because they only have
okay.
to prove 1 year living expenses as opposed to two.
Yep.
And I have just had the absolutely most amazing experience learning about these students from all over the world and from all these different cultures. We've had students from the United Kingdom and Africa, like all different countries in Africa. We've had Kenya, we've had Morocco, we've had South Africa. We've had students from Peru. We've had students from Brazil. We've had students from Mexico. We've had students from Italy. We had someone from Belarus who was on their Olympic swimming team. Like,
Wow.
how amazing is this? We had someone from Yemen. We had someone from Syria. Like, so many amazing cultures that have come to Full Sail, and I've had the benefit of learning about all of their cultures, because it's very important to me that when my students are writing stories, that they're not just trying to write what they think Hollywood wants. I want
Right.
them to kind of put a piece of themselves into it. And so there have been times where I've had to ask, like, can you explain to me this? Is this a cultural thing? And they've been able to kind of open my eyes and open the eyes of other people in the class to different kind of cultural aspects. And it's been wonderful. We did see a bit of a dip in terms of our international numbers right after the pandemic,
Sure.
obviously,
Yeah.
because for a while it was very difficult to get international students back. And then when we did have international students back, it took a little bit of time to kind of get those numbers back up. We're
Yep.
starting to get back with our international students now. I have a student from Russia who's going through the
Mm.
program right now, which I think is amazing. We haven't had anybody from Russia before. We've had a lot of people coming from Taiwan and China and just so many amazing countries being represented, tons of people from India and Pakistan. And I think besides kind of that, our program has been evolving from looking at how can we help people kind of working together to finding their own kind of artistic vision? Because we used to have where everybody would work together on a thesis film. Now everybody's kind of doing their own thesis film. And so
Hmm.
we're really working on, and I know I'm really working on giving people kind of their own ownership and their own agency towards their own filmmaking, which I think is amazing.
Yep.
I think that everyone's like nationwide. Back in October, I went to the Television Academy's Media Educator Conference, and I had a lot of conversations with faculty members from all over the country, and all of us kind of agree that we've seen how students post-pandemic are having a little bit more trouble grounding like they were before, right? So certain things are just not clicking in the same way. And some of it's little things like the idea of, oh, class is happening, I actually have to go,
Yeah.
right? Like we're seeing that people are having to retrain themselves to think of how do I think of academics and recognizing that the world is a different place, but there's still rules in place. We've seen that. But I think the more important thing is I think how I've grown as an educator is really great. Like I'm really proud of how I've grown as an educator. When I first started, I was very much like, look, I worked in Hollywood and I worked for all these studios and I did this. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell you exactly what you should do. And if you don't do it my way, you're not going to make it in the industry. Like I was totally one of those people.
Yeah.
But then I kind of came to realize that's all crap. Like one of the big things that I hear is, you should immediately distrust anyone who claims to have all of the answers of how to make it in this industry. And every time we think we know what the solution of how to get in, how to do this, how to do that, things change. Now, there's
Right.
certain things like, how do you run power? Yes, there's a safe way of doing it. And yes, there's not a safe way of doing it. But when it comes to the art side of it,
Yep.
we can say, well, this is an Oscar caliber film or this is an Oscar caliber film, right? But then it's like, last year with Everything Everywhere All at Once, it's the first film to ever win Best Picture that has a fight scene with butt plugs. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah.
the industry is constantly changing, and for any of us to be able to say, well, I know the way or I don't know the way, that's crap.
Yeah.
And so I think I've found a humility in myself as an instructor that I think actually helps my students because now it's less about me trying to say this is the way, right? And more about saying this was my experience, but let's see what you can do. And
Yeah.
let's hope you can do it better,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Now, during your time as a teacher, you've mentored over 400 student film projects, including several that went on to win or be nominated for some major awards. Talk a little bit about the mentorship experience.
It very much varies depending on the project. Sometimes I have students that really what they want in terms of mentorship is they've made a film, now they want to sit down and they want to figure out how do I get this on the film festival world. And
Yeah.
so it's a lot of, okay, let's sit down, let's go through Film Freeway, let's figure out what are the best festivals to submit to, where are the awards you should be submitting to, how do you target it, how do you change your press kit to make it that. For other students, they have more long-term goals. and this is, I see this a lot, especially with students, that they're not super happy with how their thesis film turned out. And so they want help with developing a bigger project. They want to develop a feature
Mm,
film script, or they want to develop a television script. And so we'll work together in that. I've had some students that are really interested in directing, and they really want to know, how have I done the things that I've done as a director? And I'll walk them through tactics of not only how should they approach directing their thesis film, but how should they approach becoming a director post graduation, right? And then other times, sometimes I just have students who just want to come in and talk, and they're dealing with certain issues and they just need an ear. And so it really all depends on what the individual needs of the student is. But I think the big thing that is true across the board is, ultimately, I have someone who asks for help, we sit down, and my job is to listen
mhm,
and to figure out, what does this person need? Sometimes they think they need one thing, but what they really need is they just need someone to say, it's going to be okay, right?
right.
You don't need to stress about this. Sometimes people just need a reminder that there's no ticking clock except for the one inside your own head, right? Sometimes people just need to know that somebody cares,
Yeah.
and so sitting down and listening. Recently I met with a student who, really, her big thing was, she was in the middle of a project and she was stuck, and she just needed to figure out, how do I unstuck it, right? How do I
Mm,
unstick it? And I literally just listened to what she said she had, and I saw two connections, and I said, well, what if you connect this and this? And
mm,
then just go and get one more interview here. And it was like this light went off inside of her. All I did was listen to what she said and repeated back two of the things.
yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the most important things that I've learned as a mentor, is my job is not to know everything and to instruct everything. It's to listen and connect the dots. And if I don't know something, I have zero problem admitting that. I'll be like, I have no idea.
Going back to your therapy, this comment
Yes,
from earlier.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it very much is therapy. And I think the best writing teachers and the best directing teachers I ever had were also my therapists. They were giving me permission to be me, because I think both with writing and directing, the most important thing is to find your authentic self and don't let anybody take it away from you,
Yeah.
because it's so easy to lose yourself in this industry.
Hmm.
I've had friends that they lost themselves so much that it wound up with them taking their own lives.
Yeah.
I've had friends that, they fell to eating disorders. I've had friends that they get so discouraged, they just disappear off the earth, and I have no idea if they're alive or dead. They just vanish because they're embarrassed.
Hmm.
And I think we all have this expectation of what things should be and what kind of level of success we should achieve. But ultimately, no one's keeping the score,
Right.
you know? But we always have to remind ourselves of that. Like, even this week, I had to remind myself again, no one's keeping the score. It's fine. Your
Yeah.
kid still loves you. Your husband still loves you. We're good.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just had to remind myself that.
Perspective is a very difficult thing sometimes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Now, you're also an author,
Mhm.
and you wrote a textbook, Crafting the Character Arc, a practical guide to character creation and development, which I feel like I've said this a number of times, award-winning for you.
Yes.
What was what was the writing process like, and what led you to create this resource for writers?
Sure. It really comes back to my theater days again. When I was going through kind of my script analysis classes, learning how to break down a script as a director in theater, one of the big resources that's addressed within that kind of world is looking at Freytag's pyramid, also called the major dramatic curve. And when it came time for me to direct films, I still used the major dramatic curve, right? And then when I started teaching screenwriting, I was like, well, if directors need to look for these points, then writers should be incorporating them on the front end. So
Hmm.
where's the writing books that talk about Freytag's pyramid, that talks about the major dramatic curve? They didn't exist. They
Hmm.
didn't. So directors were being asked to break it down, but writers were not being asked to write it. And that did not make sense to me. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to write a book now. And so I wanted to make sure that I had examples from all different kinds of mediums. So I was looking at novels, I was looking at games, I was looking at film, I was looking at television. So I had different examples in the books across the board. And I really just kind of broke it down and said, okay, well, I'm going to write, here's my introduction and here's some character stuff. And now let's break down the curve. And it's not a particularly long book, but I felt like it was very much important. And I reached out to Matt Peters at Beating Windward Press, and I was like, hey, I got this book. Can we like make it? And he's like, yes, let's do this. And so the first edition of the textbook came out in, I believe it was like 2013. I'm in desperate need of doing a second edition, but things just keep happening, like a whole pandemic thing.
Sure.
But the book came out, and I was originally able to just kind of, I'll be honest, I kind of used it. I created it originally because I wanted to have it as a resource for my own students, but it turned into this book that just resonates with people. And 10 years later, I'm still making really good sales. It's still the highest book that Beating Windward Press has put out in terms of sale numbers. And, it just seems to connect with people because it is so universal. And I mean, it's been around for centuries. I mean, Gustav Freytag was in the 1700s, 17th century, one of those. There's a 17 involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so his tenants have been around, and, you can match it with the Save the Cat structure. You can match it with the 3-act structure. You can match it with anything you want. It's still kind of there. I mean, it's essentially at its core, Aristotle's beginning, middle, and end, right?
Right.
Like we talked about before. And so it's now used as a textbook in quite a few different programs, including a few at Full Sail. And it's been really wonderful to see that I've been able to create a resource that, I mean, this is not stuff I came up with. This has been around, but it just wasn't framed for writers to consider. And so I really just kind of made this very practical guide of, okay, make sure your story has this and this and this and this and this. And people just seem to really resonate with it.
Yeah, sometimes the most obvious things are the most helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it's like if people are being told break down a script and find it, someone needs to tell the writers that this is what the people are looking for. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, you're also, from the, kind of out in left field, you're also credited as part of the casting department on The Matrix Revolution. How do you get involved in
Yeah.
that? And any fun stories there?
Yeah. I actually was on both the second and third Matrix films. And essentially, right after film school, me and my now ex-husband moved to San Francisco because he was working at a company called Industrial Light and Magic, which is the
Hmm.
visual effects arm of Lucasfilm. And that
Sure.
was up in the San Francisco Bay Area. So, having married the guy, I had to go up there. And I didn't have a job like lined up or anything after school. And I was just kind of looking around and trying to figure out where I was going to land. I was applying to jobs left, right, and center, spending all my free time watching the newly launched Food Network, which is why I know how to cook
Hmm.
today. But I happened to be on, of all places, Craigslist, and they had hey, we're looking for interns to work as a casting assistant. And it was not paid because back in those days, completely the Wild West of you will call them an intern and just make them work for free.
Right.
So I reached out and I said, hey, I'd like to intern. And they're like, sure, great. So the next day I hopped on the BART, went down into downtown San Francisco, and I just worked my butt off. And by about lunchtime of the first day, the owner of the casting agency came down and said, I just wanted to tell you, you're doing a really great job. And I'm like, great, when are you going to hire me? And he's like, well, I can't pay you more than minimum wage. And I'm like, well, that's better than I'm getting paid right now.
Yep.
And then about a week and a half later, he comes down. He's like, you're really doing a good job. I'm like, great, because my husband is telling me I'm not getting paid enough. Can we raise my salary? And so I got up to like $10 an hour or something, which at the time was pretty good. But yeah, I mean, it was a really fun experience. We did the second and third Matrix film. We did a television show called Nash Bridges, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We did a Jennifer Lopez film called Enough, and a whole bunch of commercials and whatnot. But the Matrix was definitely the really, really fun one. We had so many people that were not actors who were interested because it was the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
And there was a very specific type that they were looking for. So they wanted people with like tribal tattoos and ear gauges and that looked very kind of ethnic, which today I look back and I'm like, oh, that made it a white savior film, but we'll ignore that for now. It was a great film to work on, but we did all the scenes that took place on the highway where Trinity is like on her motorcycle going around the highway scene. We did the scene with all of the Agent Smith's, where he like breaks into a million characters, right? And those were all extras that looked the same, and then their faces were like digitally replaced. And then we did all of Zion. So all of those extras, it was literally like 900 people a day
Wow.
in Zion. And it was 3 days of filming. And I remember that everybody who was going to be an extra had to show up ahead of time to do like costumes, right? Well, the day before shooting, suddenly online, in the pit of the internet, someone had posted all these photos and had like pictures of their costume and stuff. And we had to, the first day of shooting, we had to like go through the crowds of like these 900 people and find the person with the right costume number to pull him, because he was like sneaking in a camera and stuff. So
Yeah.
we had to act as spies to pull him. The second day, you're supposed to have 900 people a day. We paid all these people. They're all in costume. But the second day, for some reason or another, there was like over like 100 or 200 people that just didn't show. They
Wow.
had confirmed, they just didn't show, which goes to show extras can never be relied on. That's not entirely true, but you don't want your film to like be dependent on an insane amount of extras, because this was the Matrix and people weren't showing up.
Yeah.
But we had tons of people who didn't show. We're like, oh my God, what are we going to do? It's so obvious that Zion is empty. And so I had I had called my ex-husband, and he went on like one of the internal messaging boards at ILM. And he was like, hey, the Matrix needs extras today. So like ILM emptied, like everybody took a sick day. And so if you look at Zion and you see any like heavy set, like white dudes, like hiding in the back, those are like ILM like compositors or something that like snuck away for the day because we were so low. But yeah, it was a really fun set, and I met some really great people. Like Carrie Ann Moss was amazing, Keanu Reeves was amazing. So it was a really, really fun set.
That's funny. So how can people keep up on what you're doing? You obviously got a lot going on. Anything to plug? Any contact information, social media, anything like that?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Most of my social medias are under the handle Jarvis Writes. So Jarvis, just like an Iron Man, and then Writes like I wrote a book, not like I'm right. But I'm on LinkedIn, where I usually post a lot of my updates. I do have an IMDb page, which is under Jennifer. I try to change it to Jenny, but it's under Jennifer. And I currently have my Film Connection has finished its festival run, so I can't really plug anything of that. But we have just submitted our next film is kind of out. We're kind of waiting to hear back to see where we're going to be able to have our premiere for my next film, which is called Committed. So I will be posting updates on that hopefully in the near future.
Cool. Well, we really appreciate you spending time with us today. Thanks so much for being on the Film Florida podcast.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org and like or follow our social media pages. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Please also consider going to our website and donating $20.24 for our 2024 fundraising campaign. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.